I'm a scientist. My job with you and others is to say, here's what they're telling you, and here's what the science is. And so that's my job, is to provide the science, the facts, and the data that dispute this notion of a man-made climate crisis. And again, in my first book, Inconvenient Facts, we dispelled this notion of a climate crisis quite succinctly. And now we've actually gone beyond that there is no climate crisis to what's actually happening is hugely beneficial. We're benefiting from it.
You're listening to Kerry Lutz's Financial Survival Network, where you get valuable information you just can't find anywhere else. To thrive in today's trying times, you need the Financial Survival Network, now more than ever. Go to financialsurvivalnetwork.com and get your free newsletter and gift. Financial Survival Network, now more than ever.
And welcome. You are listening to the Financial Survival Network. I'm your host, Kerry Lutz. Well, after you hear this show, I think you'll be thinking about CO2 a little bit differently than you might be already. And the reason why is because we have Gregory Wrightstone on with us. He is heads up an organization called the CO2 Coalition, and it's not exactly what you think. Gregory, welcome back to the show. So do we have a looming CO2 crisis?
Yeah, we do, actually. We have an ongoing CO2 crisis, and that's a crisis of too little carbon dioxide or CO2 in the atmosphere. We're actually at historically low levels of atmospheric CO2. We're at a little over 400 parts per million. The average throughout Earth's history was 2,600 parts per million. So the average, and life blossomed, was 6.5 times what it is today. We're solving that problem of this climate shortage in the atmosphere by burning fossil fuels and adding CO2 to the atmosphere. So my latest book, the title is A Very Convenient Warming, and the subtitle will give it away. The subtitle is How Modest Warming and More CO2 Are Benefiting Humanity. That's right. More CO2 and warmth are actually doing very, very good things for our ecosystems and for the human condition. And we should celebrate that. It's just completely opposite of what your viewers are being told every single day.
All right. So what are the benefits of elevated levels of CO2?
Well, a lot of it revolves around vegetation. And the key point here is obviously crops that we're growing. Agriculture is vegetation that we consume and eat. And this increase in CO2 are doing wonderful things for the farmers, for agricultural productivity. If we look over the last 60 years, and I capture this in my book, I look at the top 8 crops in the world in terms of tonnage produced. And all of those crops and nearly every other crop are breaking production records year after year after year. And it's credited to primarily its increase of carbon dioxide. I know middle school, or you were back in 6th grade or 7th grade, your teacher had a little cup with soil in it, and you might have put a bean in there and put it on the windowsill. And in that class, you learned about photosynthesis. And you learned, along with your viewers, what do we need for photosynthesis and plant growth? It's sunlight, water, and CO2. And the more CO2, the better. And that's what we're seeing is this tremendous response from crops worldwide, from the coldest nations to the hottest nations like India, responding to more carbon dioxide. The other good thing about carbon dioxide with this increasing amounts of CO2, it increases the drought resistivity of plants. Plants and crops resist drought because they don't use or need as much water. Because of the increases in the CO2, they're not. It's not really inhaling and exhaling, but if you kind of think of it that way, it's called transpiration process, where they bring in carbon dioxide through their pores in their leaves. They're called stomata for the scientists. And these pores in their leaves, they bring in CO2, combines with sunlight and water. The plants grow, creates mass, and the more CO2, the better. And so what we see here There are other things that are benefiting in addition to CO2 and its drought resistance and how it's turbocharging plant growth. The warming effect, we are in a warming trend. We just are. It's been warming, though, for more than 300 years. And again, this warming trend started long before Mr. Ford rolled the first Model T off of the assembly line, long before we started driving SUVs. So we had 250 years of natural warming. But now we're being told it's all the warming we're seeing is driven by carbon dioxide. And I'll dispute that strongly because those same natural forces that were driving temperatures up and down over really since the dawn of time, those natural forces have not stopped. They're still in existence today. And this warming that we're seeing, thankfully, coming up out of the death-dealing cold of the Little Ice Age, several hundred years ago, we were in what was some of the coldest temperatures of the last 10,000 years. And so this warming we're seeing, I capture it in my book, A Very Convenient Warming. I've got a chart showing a length of growing season in the continental United States. We find that in the continental United States, growing seasons have lengthened by more than 2 weeks. Think about that. That's a good thing. The lengthening growing seasons, killing frosts end earlier in the spring, arrive later in the fall. So you get more plantings. And if you own a fruit orchard, what do you fear the most? Late spring killing frosts. And because of this warming, we're seeing much less of them. And then the third thing too that's driving plant growth are the use of nitrogen fertilizer, which the climate industrial complex wants to ban entirely because of this unfounded fear of nitrous oxide that's warming the planet to unprecedented heights.
All right. So, I was always under the impression that the amount of forest in the U.S. were diminishing, and that was bad because it's not producing enough carbon dioxide. But that's not true, right?
Oh, absolutely not true. We can document that. Forests are expanding throughout the world. What we are experiencing is because of this quest for clean, renewable energy from wind turbines and solar farms. They're cutting down mature forests along the East Coast to turn them into wood pellets to ship to the United Kingdom that they will burn and call it renewable biofuel. Because, of course, those mature trees they cut down, not going to be decades, might be 100 years, but they'll come back. It's renewable. So they're cutting down our forests to burn up in the Drax electricity generation plant in the United Kingdom. They're cutting down mature forests, paving over grasslands and farmlands to put up solar-powered industrial facilities. And don't you dare call them farms. They're not solar farms. They're not wind farms. They're industrial scale, environmentally catastrophic projects that are likely harmful to whales and sea life when they're done offshore, definitely harmful to wildlife and animals, birds, if you will, when they're onshore, and they're covering up in habitat that could be used by endangered species. And so what they're doing is they're telling us there's this one of the claims is there's this ongoing sixth great extinction that we've never seen. Extinctions are increasing by a huge number. And just the opposite is the case. Extinctions are declining. But the one thing, that was a UN report that came out. The one thing the UN got correct in this extinction report they published here last year, they said the greatest threat to endangered species is loss of habitat. I agree with that. They're entirely correct. What's their solution to serve the climate change crisis that's not happening, by the way? It's destroy the habitat. Destroy habitat that the endangered species that they claim to care about. It's just crazy. We have to protect our endangered species. Oh, by the way, we just have to pave over these thousands of square miles to put up solar industrial facilities. Oh, we'll just have to cut down the forests. But the big story here is the Earth itself is not experiencing deforestation. We're experiencing reforestation. The forested standing timber area in the United States is hugely increased. I just looked at my ex-home state. I'm living now in the free state of Florida, by the way. But my ex, where I moved from Pennsylvania, I looked at the standing timber forested area in the United States, or Pennsylvania, excuse me, has increased 5.2 times since 1953. That was a published report that just came out. More than five times the amount of forests in Pennsylvania. And we see this reflected throughout the United States, India, a lot of the developing world. We're seeing this increase in forests and standing timber. We should celebrate that.
All right. So, but what about the rainforest, man? They're being deforested and all these bad things are happening. Shouldn't you be scared to death of that?
No, that's another fallacy. Again, they're talking, is some of the Amazon rainforest being cut down? Yeah. Not a whole lot in the big scheme of things, and it grows back extremely quickly. If they turn it over into crops or grassland for raising cattle, of course, cattle will keep that crop. But the fact of the matter is the Patinel, which is part of the Amazon rainforest, is thriving and prospering. And they're talking about the other rainforests around the world, like Indonesia. They're cutting down endangered species habitats, like for the orangutan, and they're cutting the forest down and putting up monoculture palm trees for biofuel. And so once again, I guess the story that they believe is in order to save the environment, we need to destroy the environment. I say,
like Vietnam. In order to save the village, we got to kill it, right?
Now you're on to that's now. Yeah, now you've got it correct.
But what about food? Like we got to be eating bugs because the cows are dangerous to our continued existence. Like a T-bone steak is going to be on the endangered species list the way we're going now, and they view the elites as useless eaters, right?
They are. And I've got a large carbon footprint and I'm proud of it. The larger, the better, I say, because we've got an unofficial motto here at the CO2 Coalition. Our motto that we go by is, we love CO2 and so should you, because of the many benefits that we're seeing from, again, modest warming and more CO2. It's a hugely beneficial result that we're seeing from both warming and more CO2. So life is good and getting better. That's the theme of my new book.
They don't like to hear that.
No.
So I got one for you. So all these climate change people who are up in arms and want us to all stop driving our SUVs, they're in their private jets going all over the world to conferences. So they don't even know that they're actually helping the climate by burning up all that oxygen, creating CO2.
Exactly. And I think they know. They don't know about the benefits of CO2. I suspect very few of these blowhards like Al Gore or John Kerry or Greta Thunberg. It's quite possible they don't really realize how much of a benefit they're getting by increasing CO2. Why are they doing this? It's really, I get asked that all the time. And, I don't know. Kerry, you're just as qualified, and everyone watching this right now is just as qualified as I am to say why they're doing it. I'm a scientist. My job with you and others is to say, here's what they're telling you, and here's what the science is. And so that's my job, is to provide the science, the facts, and the data that dispute this notion of a man-made climate crisis. And again, in my first book, Inconvenient Facts, we dispelled this notion of a climate crisis quite succinctly. And now we've actually gone beyond that there is no climate crisis to what's actually happening is hugely beneficial. We're benefiting from it.
All right. So you're not making any friends out there. And I should have mentioned, Greg, that you are a geologist and, you've got a scientific background here. So you're not just speaking from the cuff here. This is all science-based.
It is. And the CO2 coalition that I lead, I'm executive director there. We have nearly 200 of the top experts and scientists in the world, people like Dr. Patrick Moore, who was a founder of Greenpeace, who I would recommend getting on this show with you. He's a wonderful interview, really fascinating, but a founder of Greenpeace. And he sits on our board. Another board member is John Clauser. He was the 2022 Nobel laureate in physics. It's hard to call him a science denier with a Nobel laureate in physics, but they do. Or Dr. William Happer, emeritus professor of physics at Princeton. And these are top scientists, top physicists in the world. We have a number. What we do is take a look at the data and the science behind disputing what this is. And a lot of these reports that we write are pretty unreadable for the main person, but we take them and synthesize them into a readable document. And then you can get a lot of this information at co2coalition.org, co2coalition.org. For example, we're working right now on a number of papers. One we're finishing up is Arkansas and climate. And it's fascinating. What we find is Arkansas in particular is kind of ground zero for it, but that whole area, there's about an 11 or 12 state area where temperatures have actually been declining for the last several decades. They're not increasing, they're declining. They keep that very quiet. And so we'll be publishing our Arkansas report. Those in the Midwest want to learn more about what's happening in the Midwest, go to co2coalition.org and just search for Midwest and come up with our Midwest report to find out that life is good in America's breadbasket and getting better was the subtitle. Most recent report was Wyoming, where the governor there is promoting this carbon capture. He's teamed up with these other Republican governors of the North, like Kristi Noem and Doug Burgum, to decarbonize the West. We're going to decarbonize the West. We're going to spend billions of dollars to capture CO2 from our coal-fired power plants and then pump it underground. But the dirty little secret is if you do this carbon capture on coal-fired power plants, the plants, it takes almost 25% of their energy output to do the carbon capture. So now you've got to do, where's that energy going to come from? It's crazy to be taking a beneficial molecule out of the atmosphere using so much electricity and energy.
That's amazing. Amazing. It's like a case of like everything you know is wrong, right?
Yep. It's if what they're proposing actually comes to pass. We have a recent study by Dr. Linz and Happer, Steve Koonin. These are all top physicists. And in it, they conclude that the proposals of lowering CO2, eliminating nitrogen fertilizer, blocking the sunlight with geoengineering, all of these will lead to to crop failure and probably starvation and probably the deaths of millions of people, all in the name of solving a non-existent climate crisis. So no, we're pushing back. I won't stand for it. And we have these Republicans that think they're doing the right thing. They say, "Oh, we don't want to spend trillions of dollars." No, we just want to spend $850 billion, not trillions. I say no. I say not $850 billion, not 850,000, not $8.50. Not one red cent of our tax money should be spent to solve what is obviously a non-existent climate crisis. It ain't happening. It's not going to happen. And we should rejoice in what we're saying because, man, life is good and getting better.
But Greg, New York City is going to be underwater and Miami Beach. Florida is just going to be all underwater because the ice cap's melting, because Antarctica is melting, and it's just going to cover everything, right? I mean, isn't that true?
Yeah, that's what they're telling you. Let's explore that a little bit. Number one, you can melt the entire polar ice cap, northern polar ice cap, and it would scarcely affect sea level. And the reason is that ice cap is floating on water. Think about the Titanic and the iceberg. 90% of that iceberg is underwater. And so you can do that experiment at home. Put a jar of water, put some ice cubes in it, mark the level. And when those ice cubes melt, the water level remains the same. It's the same with the oceans. And Antarctic is actually gaining ice, as is Greenland is gaining ice. And the other thing they talk about are these at-risk island nations like Tuvalu and the Maldives. If we look at the Maldives, it's in the Indian Ocean. It's a whole series of these coral atolls and islands. They're the premier, the way the president of the Maldives is standing there with his hand out, wanting climate reparations. So I can't blame them. But they're talking about giving him billions of dollars for climate reparations because they're going to be underwater in a few decades. Well, guess what? Let's look at that. The Maldives, 15,000 years ago, were just above sea level, just as they are today. In that 15,000 years, sea level has risen 400 feet. Why are those islands not under 400 feet of water? Question. And I've got a good answer. It's a number of things going into this. Primarily, number one, as sea level rises, the coral grows with it. That's pretty easy to understand. But how does the island itself grow above sea level? It's a process known as accretion. It's a geologic process where the waves break off coral and sand. And as storms come in, they wash the sand and the gravels up onto the island. And then the critters on the island distribute it around the island. And that's what we call accretion. And actually, the Maldives and many of the islands around the world, more islands are growing than are shrinking. So it's completely opposite of what you're being told. And it's this accretionary process of these islands around the world. Otherwise, all these islands would have been completely underwater thousands and thousands of years ago.
Well, I find it interesting that a lot of what they attribute to climate change is really erosion, right?
Yeah.
Like I see it like in Montauk. The lighthouse was built in the late 1700s, and it was like 400 feet from the water. And now it's like 100 feet, and eventually it'll be gone. And then I see like Cape Cod, all of these buildings, kind of the houses built on the bluffs. A lot of them are too close to the water, and, the erosion of that is what's causing it. But that isn't climate change.
No, it isn't. It's a geologic. Again, I'm a geologist. So I've studied these things. These are all along the eastern coast. We have a series of what are called barrier islands.
Correct.
And these barrier islands move. Their erosion takes place either in the north or south of the island, depending which way the water currents are going. And then there's accretion that occurs on the other end of the island. So these things are over hundreds of years and some thousands of years. These barrier islands are moving and moving and moving. And what was once near the water is now, in some cases, far inland because the sand's accretionary process, and it's eroding at the other end of the island. And we see this as a natural process. So you got to almost have a geologist. If you're going to buy a property near the shore, you should probably have a geologist tell you, well, you probably don't want to build there. You're in an erosionary area. And
and the flood zone too, because we got these storm surges, everything else. I mean, you look at the barrier islands and the East Coast, and those are always the ones that get slammed by the storms and the ones that are eroding away. Now, interestingly, though, if you look at an aerial picture of Miami Beach, the shoreline is almost identical to what it was 60, 80 years ago.
Right. Well, the whole East Coast and Miami are subsiding a little bit. And in many areas, the subsidence is more than what the sea level rise is. So it's called relative sea level rise. Because of the geologic tectonic of the East Coast of the United States, and it may be 6 or 7 inches per century that it might be subsiding, and sea level is increasing 6 or 7 inches. So the net result of that would be 13 or 14 inches of apparent sea level rise, when only half of it truly is sea level. And that's because of the glaciers that covered North America if you can imagine a waterbed, those glaciers actually pushed, there was so much weight with thousands of feet of ice, it actually pushed the mantle of the earth down across all of North America. And as they retreated, it's now rising back up. So just imagine getting into a waterbed, and of course it sinks down where you're in it. And then when you get out, the outer edges, when you're in that waterbed, rise up a little bit. When you come out, they fall. And that's what we're seeing here in the United States and around the world. Tectonic release of the margins of the continents.
Yeah, well, one thing I will say, they've gotten smarter about the shorelines, doing all these plantings, which helps stop the erosion or at least slow it down considerably. But again, much ado about nothing. Hey, how do we find out more about your organization, about the CO2 Coalition? I know that
just luck out here. Well, you got my new book, A Very Convenient Warming, published just recently. So it's been very successful. A Very Convenient Warming. My first book, Inconvenient Facts, we just had the 10th printing that we just got done here last week, and so it's been highly successful. Again, that's Inconvenient Facts, which was published a few years ago, but is still pretty high on the bestseller charts on Amazon right now. So Inconvenient Facts and A Very Convenient Warming. To learn more about this information, go to co2coalition.org, co2coalition.org.
Great. And there's a link in the show notes to your site on financialsurvivalnetwork.com. Please go over there, sign up for your free newsletter. And it's always great having you on, Gregory. It's fascinating how much we think we know and how little we actually know, which is often the case. And the problem is when those people start passing policies that wind up costing us money and really doing more harm and not accomplishing what they're supposed to. If you've got a question for Gregory or myself, kl@kerrylutz.com is the email address. We'll talk to you again. And thanks for coming on.
Thanks for listening to Kerry Lutz's Financial Survival Network, your solution to today's trying times. For the latest, go to financialsurvivalnetwork.com. Financial Survival Network, now more than ever.